Just like any podcast, before we begin, let's say some thanks to some friends. How about Gooder Sunglasses, people? The place for style, function, fit, and value for your eyewear, both on and off the bike. Please do not fall victim to that good old-fashioned douchebag sunglass syndrome. Get to Gooder.com today. Grab about 10 pair for the price of the D-bag brand and look good no matter what you're doing. Gooder Sunglasses. Ambassador Cycling, folks, now an official sponsor of Arrive Packfiller Racing for 2022. Get fit to get fit, people. You know, being properly set up on the bike is the most critical part of your cycling experience. If you want to add watts, you got to get fit properly to your bike. Think you know everything you know and you're supposed to do in terms of fit? Well, you probably don't. Trust Sam at ambassadorcycling.com. How about Untapped Maple, folks? That home for quick digesting, great tasting fueling for your ride. All natural, using the finest maple syrup as the source. Get to untapped.cc. Then notice that's not a .com. Untapped.cc today to enjoy the fueling choice of the one and only Ted King. Ted King. Well, finally, everybody, Scratch Labs. Speaking of fuel, you know you have to drink, right? Well, Scratch Labs has you covered. Make sure you keep going. Best tasting liquid to put in your bottles, I promise. Get to scratchlabs.com today, and that thanks the sponsors for this podcast. Let's get to the theme. I know what you're thinking to yourself. First of all, what's Pat eating? I'm not really eating anything. I'm eating ice from my iced coffee. I'm not even having a beer for this episode. And you're probably thinking, where's the witty banter between the guys and the stupid nonsensical stuff they're talking about? Like I always come up to the shows like they're in mid-conversation. Well, I'm kind of flying solo this week. As promised last week, this week is a week from hell for yours truly, and so we try to get our 50 shows in a year, and every so often we have to take a week off. Well, guess what? We're still getting those 50 shows in because we have a show for you this week. It's just that it's not live. It's pre-recorded. Welcome to another episode of the Packfiller podcast. I'm Pat Bulger in the studio. Well, it's a mess again, you guys. I'm redoing all the computers and stuff like that, so it's an absolute train wreck, but Mender, the studio dog's in here with me, and we're getting this done on what day is it? It's Monday. So we're going to post this for you guys on Tuesday. This episode is kind of a greatest hits. But it's not a replay. Don't shut off your phone or your iPod. Do people still have iPods or anything like that? Whatever source you're listening to, don't shut it off because this is a new episode. But it's with some old friends who are actually trying to change the way cycling media is presented to us. Sure, you all listen to podcasts, right? Duh, right? You're listening to one right now. In case you didn't know, this is one. But yeah, and you probably tried to get your old magazines. If you remember Winning Magazine, Velo News Magazine, all those things, they're all kind of going the way of the dodo these days, unfortunately. So how do we get our cycling media? Well, a lot of us go to YouTube. A lot of us do these wonderful podcasts. So these guys have thought of a great way to create a cycling magazine for your ears. That's right. You're not hearing it incorrectly. A cycling magazine for your ears. Returning to the show on today's episode are John Galloway, formerly of the Velocast. Yeah, you know that one. If you've been listening to podcasts, you know John Galloway. And also Chris Sidwells, who has been on the show, cycling journalist, many, many books, and I guess I could say relative of the legendary Tom Simpson. So two people who definitely know their shit when it comes to bike racing and bike media. And so they're creating this thing called the Cycling Legends. Now, I'm going to say it to you here, and I do say it in the interview. I do have a slight stake in this because for some reason I think somebody at Cycling Legends, one of those guys lost a bet, and yours truly is going to be a part of one of the segments coming up here, starting, I think, this very weekend, just after Het Nieuwsblad. So we're going to be doing that, and I'm going to be a part of those shows. But it's a subscription-based podcast, but it is, and hopefully this episode will help you realize that the price of a cup of coffee and an entire cycling magazine for your ears is a pretty damn good value, and hopefully we can do that and convince you here in this podcast. And we also get to talk about a lot of other nonsensical fun bike stuff. So hey, without further ado, let's hear from John Galloway and Chris Sidwells, creators, founders, innovators, I'm kissing ass, of the cycling legends here on the Packfiller. Okay, everybody, today's guests are taking the way cycling media is presented, taking a definitely new way. I'm going to try that again. All right, everybody. Today's guests are taking on the way cycling media is presented from the one and only Velocast. And if you are a cycling podcast fan, you had better know that one. To the incredible collection of books under the Cycling Legends banner, there isn't a person, concept, or discussion regarding the sport of cycling that these two cannot sit upon. So welcome back to the show, John Galloway and Chris Sidwells. How are you both?
Mr. Bolton, hello.
Yeah, hello.
So, I before we even get this entire thing underway, I want to kind of get something straight for the record here. It's almost like I have to indicate, the powers that be there. I have a personal interest in the topic we're going to be speaking about today, and in terms of your, Chris, your creation and invention of this cycling magazine for your ears, so to speak. And I just want to ask you both, before we completely begin the interview at all, what was the thinking in having a segment with not but one but two American perspectives, and have you sought help for that sort of a thing yet?
Well, I'll field that one. The simple answer is I enjoy talking to you and David. And a good podcast should be a conversation. Listeners really enjoy it when they feel part of a conversation. And in fact, social media has allowed them to be that. We talk to listeners all the time on social media, and they become part of the conversation. They talk about the same topics that we discuss. And when you and I talked, when you were kind enough to have me as a guest in the Packfiller, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And we could have gone on for hours. And then David and I, David Stanley's the other one who's actually, he's written about cycling for as long as I know. He's a poet. He's a kind of proper Renaissance man.
Yeah.
And when David and I were talking, it was the same thing. I really enjoyed it. So when the Velocast stopped, essentially I'm 60 next birthday. I'm just 59. And I've been thinking about retiring for a while, although I've surprised myself by thinking, I don't think I will retire for quite a while now.
No.
My Velocast partner, Scott, is much younger than me. So I've been pestering him for ages to get a job, because the Velocast was just Scott and I. And when I retired, he would be left without any income, or to have to rebuild the thing from scratch. So he got a job, so the Velocast stopped, and I thought, actually, I'm not ready to stop. What do I want to do? And the simple answer is talk to people whose company I enjoy. Chris joined us in the Velocast in the last, year and a half, Chris?
I think so, yeah.
And I thoroughly enjoyed talking to him. And as I said, without, blowing smoke up your rear end, talking to you, Pat, and talking to David was thoroughly enjoyable. So when we were putting sections together, Chris and I thought about people we wanted to be involved. And you two were on the list. It's as simple as that.
And I do have to confess that one of the things along the way was asking permission to use profanity, because sometimes that just slips out, and I wanted to make sure that if I dropped an F-bomb or something like that halfway through the show, that the red alarms wouldn't go off and I'd immediately be cut from the family, so to speak.
No, we're reality. We're into reality. That's how people talk, isn't it? And also, I'm much from the cycling, writing and talking. It should be entertainment. It should be good. It should be funny. It should be involved. It should be light. This is what people do for hobbies.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be too earnest.
Yeah.
And I don't want the Cycling Legends podcast to be too earnest. We'll have occasions when we're being sensible, but let's enjoy it.
Sure. So you guys, when you spoke about, John, you spoke about the Velocast and then your origin story here, if we were to speak of that, and how that grew into its height of
magnificence.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. And then this evolution into what you guys are doing here. So for the listeners who might not be up to speed, take us through the inception of the Velocast and why you decided to stop it, even though your partner decided to get a real job.
Yeah. I'll keep it brief because people have heard this before. The Velocast started when Scott O'Rourke, who was my partner in the Velocast, and I were friends in the noughties. We first met in 2003. In 2009, I had a spare seat for the road trip down to Eurobike, the big trade show in Germany. And I'd sold Scott bikes, and we were both guitarists and musicians, and I really enjoyed his company. There's a theme developing here. I just talk to people that I like. So we went down to Eurobike, wandered around Eurobike, and I spent the entire time going, that works with that that aluminium's hydroformed like that, these forks have blah blah, all the usual technical crap. And Scott, when we came back, pestered me to do a podcast, and I thought, nobody actually wants to listen to two Scotsmen waffling about cycling. Hello, Annie. And,
hello. Shut up.
That's Annie, Chris's dog. She's an integral part of the podcast.
Yeah.
And Scott finally wore me down, and we recorded a show, and I listened to the first one a while ago, and God, it was terrible. But the timing was great. There were very few people who were doing podcasting at the time. You were one of them. You were one of the pioneers in cycling podcasting. And it grew and grew to the point where it was just too much work, so we stopped. And then after a year, people pestered us. And actually, in the interim, some other podcasts had started because the Velocast had stopped. We had the Bike Shop show started because the Velocast stopped. The Velo Club Don Logan, of which more soon, started because the Velocast had stopped. But we came back and said, right, if we're going to do it, it needs to make money. We'll do daily shows for the tour. We'll charge 20 quid. If we make money, we'll keep going. And if we don't, we'll stop. And it went nuts. And for the last 10 years, it's been my sole income, actually. It's been all I did. I had to stop my previous job. And when it stopped, what I wanted to do was essentially do lots of different podcasts and charge a tiny amount for each of them. You and I talked about this.
Yeah.
Maybe 99 cents or whatever, and people could pick and mix and do what they wanted. But the nature of finance and the internet precluded that, because there's a flat handling fee from even good providers like Stripe. That means small amounts, you end up walking away with cents.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. And meanwhile, Chris had been talking about this idea for a magazine. I mean, he's got ideas that go far beyond the audio. He'd been talking to me about multimedia stuff, website integration, all sorts of stuff. And that just seemed like a natural fit. So when it stopped, Chris and I talked. We agreed we were going to do something that was essentially a monthly magazine, columns, segments, all that kind of stuff, but in audio form. And here we are. So the Velocast has stopped because it didn't feel right to carry on without Scott. We could have kept the name, but the Velocast was Scott and I. So now it's Chris and I, and a cohort of fellow adventurers, and it's the Cycling Legends podcast, and I'm really enjoying it. It's nice after all these years talking to the same person. God love him, I still talk to Scott all the time, although mostly about watches now. He's a really close friend. But it's really nice to be talking to new people and doing new stuff, and hopefully we can, in the way that the Velocast, I'll take pride in the fact that it moved the goalposts. We were probably the first cycling podcast to actually make a decent living out of the thing and be able to pay contributors properly for their input. And the way that we moved the goalposts with that, I think Chris and I and you and David and Gary Fairley, who's joining us, who was a member of the aforementioned Velo Club Don Logan, we can change the paradigm a wee bit again without being too pretentious, because as Chris says, it's got to be fun.
Yeah. Chris, now your history obviously is well known. I've had you on the show before. It's almost like you were thrust into the sport with a bloodline such as yours, with Tom Simpson involved and things like that. But talk to me about the transition from the written word to the spoken word, and what that process has been like going from there.
Well, I think a good writer, you should be able to read out what you're writing, and it makes sense in spoken words. It's the same. I think if you can speak, you can write, and the two should be the same. So I don't think there's a massive gap between the two. You still have to paint a picture in words. It's not the same as using television or a visual medium. So you still have to present everything on all your facts and everything and assemble them. Perhaps you've got more time in writing to do it more logically, but then you've also got I like the spontaneity of the spoken word. And very often, I mean, when you write something, the best thing you wrote was what you first put down, because you end up messing about with it, taking commas out and putting semicolons in, and end up back with what you first wrote in the first place. So you can overthink writing, and that's what I'm liking. And I don't particularly like to overthink writing. People say that's a bit shallow, but I like that flow of consciousness, and I like writing in a flow of consciousness and making people feel like they're there at that moment in history. And so for me, the way I write and talking is quite similar. I don't quite write as hesitatedly as I just spoke.
But, no pressure there, right?
I usually have I've got a lot more ideas in my head than can come out of my mouth.
We've seen a insane collapse of cycling journalism, of the written word, in terms of so many of the publications that seem to be falling by the wayside. Velo News, I know, just recently went to strictly online format. We've seen some great physical magazines that have unfortunately passed away. Was that, first of all, what do you attribute to that? And second of all, was that the inspiration to create something like this, where this podcast medium, where it is something that is much more mobile and accessible format, I guess?
Yeah, I would love a paper magazine, but the model that a paper magazine is supported by advertising from bicycle companies and manufacturers is just not on now. Everybody can do their own thing. They've got their own magazine. They've got their own websites. So they don't need. And I just feel that life's got really busy, whether it is more busy or not. People haven't got the time to sit and go through a magazine. But I think mostly it's a financial thing. So you would have to make the magazines £20,
mm-hmm.
so they make a profit on their own right. Rather
and
than
I think
supported by.
I mean, what I would say is very similar. I think a magazine is something that demands your physical attention. You know, you can't do the washing up while you're reading a magazine. You can't watch the television or whatever while you're reading a magazine. You can't go out on your bike and read a magazine at the same time. You know, that would not be a safe way to ride your bicycle. And I think the attention demanding thing has been taken over by YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, video channels on YouTube have taken over that visual attention segment of the market. The great thing about audio, particularly when you supplement it with, I mean, we just started today a feature where you can go onto the website to read stuff that's related to the podcast, and you'll be able to go in and look at pictures that are related to the podcast. The great thing about audio, and what drew me to it first, I mean, you know, my background, both of you, I was what you'd call a mailman, Pat, a postman, because it let me look after our 3 kids when they were still of school age. I'd spend 8 hours a day listening to stuff. And that's the great thing about audio. You can go about your life, but still get entertainment, still get information without it interfering with what you're doing as well. And I think that's really unique. You know, YouTube is great. I love YouTube. I'm obsessed with YouTube just now. It's a great way to get information. It's a great way to be entertained, but you're sat in front of a box. Yeah. A magazine's the same. You're sat in front of a magazine. With audio, you can be out on a bike ride, you can be out for a dog walk, you know, all of that kind of stuff, and still get the input. So it's very time efficient, and it's also far more relaxed because it feels like a conversation. Mm-hmm. I think paper, I hate to say it because I love physical media, I love magazines, I love books, but the time's passed because of all the cost constraints that Chris just talked about.
And
yeah, and you know, I make books, illustrated books. I also, Cycling Legends has got 3 tiers. It's got the Cycling Legends podcast, it's got Cycling Legends books, and we're making lovely illustrated books, and it's got Cycling Legends events. We've only got 1 event at the moment. We're going to try to build that up, and I think this sort of multimedia idea is the way to go. I think that we're still giving everybody the same as you get in a magazine. We're giving them features which become radio documentaries, essentially. Our features are, you know, to link, and then you talk to somebody about that to cover a subject. We covered the last one. We covered cycling photography by speaking to 2 photographers working in different fields, and a motorbike driver for Graham Watson, because he's just as much part of the photographic process in capturing those images. And I think you can just investigate so much more. I'm even thinking the interviews are working better. Certainly they will when they're face to face, but even people with Zoom and Skype and Zencaster and things, it just seems to be a little bit not easier. There's a little bit of the other things that you have to think about advertising, about not offending a supporter of a magazine. You can't do a review. I mean, a review of bikes is just a bit of a laugh in a magazine, isn't it? Because you can't offend the person who's giving you the bike. They tried it. They did some really good bike reviews by Alan Piper in the old Cyclesport magazine, but they, ex-pro Alan Piper, but they had to be stopped because people were getting upset when Alan said your bike's no good. Which we could do bike reviews on a podcast because we're not dependent on them as a sponsor.
Yeah. Wow. And you've kind of covered this fairly well, but this is just I guess another opportunity for you to show off your tail feathers here a little bit. But what separates this from? I know there are people out there probably listening to this free podcast thinking to themselves, "It's a paid platform. What establishes this different from so many other cycling podcasts of people who might think they know what they're talking about? Wink, wink. I'm talking about myself."
There's two things, and one is production standards. I mean, that's the obvious thing. Old pros like yourself, Pat, put out a fantastic product. They really do. David Bernstein, who used to do the Fredcast, same thing. He used to put out a fantastic product. A lot of the newer ones, the content is great. The conversation's great. They know what they're talking about, but it sounds like it's recorded in someone's toilet. And nobody wants to listen to that. So, I mean, that's the obvious thing, but you can get that free as well. I think what you're really selling is engagement, because we're being paid for it, because it's actually our job. I used to say the podcast was actually just, the leading edge of the job. Most of it is talking to subscribers.
Yeah.
And people who follow me on Twitter will get a glimpse of that. I'm very active on Twitter. But if you're a subscriber, you can talk to us. Now, moving forward, as the world opens up, Chris and I have plans to go and visit service courses to talk to the mechanics of pro teams on the continent, to go to team launches, but without being sponsored by, the manufacturer or whatever. That means you can go to the team launch with open eyes and be completely open about it. We're talking about going to races and getting slightly left field views, again, because we're not dependent on manufacturer sponsorship. Being paid for by part of your own community gives you a freedom that's lacking in a fully advertised sponsored podcast. It gives us a freedom to provide the kind of content which you'll enjoy. It lets us be fans as opposed to mouthpieces. And that's not to criticise advertising for podcasts. It's a perfectly valid business model. It's just we can be more relaxed and, dare I say it, slightly more critical if we need to be. And the engagement is something that time and again, subscribers to the Velocast, the previous podcast, used to rave about how engaged they felt with the podcast. So I think you get to feel part of a community. But as the world opens up, you'll also be funding trips which are very, very different from what you get in the traditional magazines or podcasts.
Yeah. And also, I just want to, I'm going to blow my own trumpet here. That's an expression of being, I'm going to start blowing smoke, is that I've got a really good contact book. I've worked in this for a while, and I've had a lot of good contacts within the teams and within the riders. And I do think I get good interviews.
Yeah. And
I do think this is going to be strong. I do have an ability, and I've always had it, to get people to talk to me and talk to me in depth. And that's why I'm sort of doing the interviews and the features, because it's all about people talking to me. Mm-hmm. And it's something I've always been able to do. So I just think they're going to get that extra quality of feature and an interview. And people are willing to speak to me. They seem to speak to me with freedom. And it's always been something I've been able to do in the magazines over the years. And it's something I'm very, very much interested in, talking to people. I love talking to people.
I can actually give you, I'm sorry, you can tell we can talk, Pat. I mean, that's one thing we're not sure of. I'll give you a perfect example of that. Chris did an interview with Ed Clancy, British Olympian, absolute cornerstone of the British Team Pursuit squad, as well as a good individual rider in his own right. And I got 2 comments from people about that interview. One is nobody had ever heard anybody go into the kind of technical depth about the modern Team Pursuit that Chris managed to draw from, Ed. It's completely changed in terms of aerodynamic effects, the way that affects the ride plan, all that kind of stuff. So if you're into the tech, that's fascinating, and you won't have seen that anywhere else. But for me, the crucial bit of a podcast, and you'll know about this, when you're editing, the one thing you don't want is dead space. You don't want people wondering if suddenly the podcast has stopped and they've just missed something. There was a point where Chris said to Ed, "So are you enjoying your cycling, Ed?" And there was the longest pause I've ever left in a podcast. And he drew out an answer which was honest and actually ultimately very affirmative. It left you feeling good about it. But unlike in the written word, you could hear Ed having to think about that, having to formulate his response. You don't get that anywhere else.
You couldn't get that in the written word, and it was a wonderful moment. And it's the interviews as well are about sort of leading somebody, becoming empathizing with somebody, and getting them to go down a certain path to talk about. And you can realize what they want to talk about. You can realize, without making them uncomfortable, what they might be battling with in their own mind at that moment. I mean, it's no secret, I was an ex-policeman. I did a lot of interviews. I'm a trained interviewer.
You can tell.
That's a completely different world. But our job as interviewers was to lead somebody down a path that was to confessional, confronting their own truth. Now, I'm never as heavy as that in an interview with a professional cyclist, but it's something that I've always seemed to be able to get to. And I've had some remarkable replies from even some of the greats. I mean, Eddie Merckx telling me that I asked him, what's it like to be Eddie Merckx? And he says, I'm confronted by nobody wants to know me. I'm confronted by a man in his 20s that I've got nothing in common with. I go around the world and they want to know about that man. They don't want to know about me. So that's the level of depth I can get to in an interview. And that's what I'm always trying to do. I've probably frightened every cyclist I've ever been interviewed by me now.
Wow. And there always seems to be that, I'm sure you get it quite often, Chris, is that adversarial expectation where many people are very hesitant to release any type of openness because they're afraid they're going to get slapped on the hand and something's going to get published that's going to bury them or destroy their career.
Yeah, and I'm never adversarial. I mean, there's no point. It's entertainment. It's about finding out about this person.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a good guy. He's a good guy or a good person, good woman or whatever, because they're a cyclist anyway. So we're on safe ground.
And there are so many stories behind. To know Eddie Merckx's story behind Eddie Merckx's career that would be incredible. So why cycling, guys? There are so many topics out there that are so profitable, and especially for me here in the United States, where cyclists are more of an annoyance than a sport or a hobby or a pastime or something that takes place on a stationary bike that you have a heart attack on. Why cycling? What was your reasoning behind that one? So many things you guys could talk about.
Go first.
Well, I'll go first because mine's much simpler. I mean, yours is just genetic. You had no choice in the matter.
No, I hadn't.
I'm no longer. I mean, I'm an old fat tourist now. I'm a mountaineer. I mean, that was my first passion, climbing on rock and ice. And I got into cycling to stay fit for the hill. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I tend to get overly passionate about things. You know, the old phrase, if a thing's worth doing, it's worth overdoing, essentially describes my involvement with everything I've ever become passionate about. So I got into cycling, then I got a job working for the Edinburgh Bicycle Co-op, which is a significant shop in Scotland. And lots of people were racing there. So I got into racing and became passionate about that. And I'm a time trialist. So being a time trialist, what you're obsessed with is bike tech. So then I got passionate about bike tech. And it was the usual thing, be out for a training ride, imagining that you're, Laurent Fignon, the Jouplan, or, Eddie Merckx on the Marmalade or whatever. And it just became my life. It and mountaineering and actually guitar as well were the three. It was the tripod that my life was built around. And of all of those, I still climb a bit, not as much as I used to. I still cycle a bit, although I'm a fat tourist. But those passions have remained. So when Scott persuaded me to talk about cycling, and it became clear that, one, I'm very good at talking, as you can tell, at least in, never mind the quality, feel the quantity kind of stuff. I remain obsessed with cycling. I can't help but watch the races. I can't help but follow the tech. I can't help but look at the history. There's no choice for me now. It's just who I am. Whereas, Chris, it's who he was born to be, I think.
I'm just fascinated by it, and I've been fascinated all my life. I sometimes ask myself why. I'm a storyteller, and it's absolutely full of stories. Races fascinate me in that it's not played on a pitch. It's not. I mean, track racing's in the track, yeah, but road racing has got so many. It's chaos, really. How do they get order out of chaos, and how these things are controlled? And there's so many dynamics going on in a race. There's so many, and time trials and everything. Cycling is complicated, and it's fascinating, and it's also quite beautiful. Even though it's got this checkered history, and it's got the doping problems and corruption and paying people off, and even that adds a layer of interest and fascination to it. It's just a fascinating sport, and you just can. I still don't totally understand it, but because you can't. Nobody, no one person can.
One thing that both my first passion, mountaineering, and cycling have in common, which I think is actually really important, is that whether you are, Tadej Pogačar or, Dougal Haston or Adam Ondra or any of the really top-end climbers, or whether you're a punter, you experience the same thing. If you're doing an 18-minute 10, it hurts you the same way as somebody doing a 28-minute 10. If you're at the limit on a 5:15 in American grade, you're experiencing the same sensation as someone who's on the limit on a 5:7. Being at your limit is a relative thing. So people can really appreciate what they're watching. When they watch Tadej Pogačar on La Planche de Belfi and that amazing time trial, they know what it feels like to be completely on top of a gear on a climb, even if they're going at half the speed that he is.
Yeah.
So they're really relatable sports. I think that's incredibly important, because we can watch these guys and we're slower, we're fatter, we're not as tactically as astute, but we can appreciate what they're going for because we feel the same pain, albeit at half the speed.
That's a great way to think about it.
That is perfect. Yes, it is.
So can I ask how the reaction has been since the launch?
We've done a fairly soft launch so far. I mean,
Okay.
I've emailed some folk from the Velocast, but Chris has had some long-standing projects that he's had to finish off. So our plan was to go gung-ho with the start of the season. Now, you and me and David are recording next Sunday, Pat.
Yes.
I'm recording with Gary this Thursday. For Gary and I are doing a news show, Gary Fairley, which will be fortnightly. Chris has got features lined up now. I mean, there's content coming thick and fast. So it'll be a hard launch now, but already we're doing well. We're doing well enough to be talking about, Chris and I were talking about new equipment for Chris and that kind of thing, because, I've got a very posh microphone and Chris has got a nice microphone that we sent him.
Hey, there we go.
we need something much posher. I've been really pleased. It's a steady build, and my experience from the Velocast tells me that once the season starts, and particularly once the Tour de France starts, because that's the elephant in the room that everybody gets excited about, I think we're on a winner here. I think we're going to do okay. And the big thing is it's, as opposed to a print magazine or even the monthly subscription for the Velocast, it's really reasonably priced. This is, I'm gonna plug it now.
Yeah, please.
It's £3.50 in sterling, which is what, $5, and you're going to get a lot of content, to the point where I would say to people, don't worry if you can't listen to it all. There's this whole thing where people used to moan at me in the Velocast because they couldn't manage to listen to everything. You don't have to. It's like a magazine. Read what interests you, listen to what interests you. Don't worry if you can't get it all. For the price of what, a frothy coffee? I think
That's what I say,
it's a
yes.
pretty good proposition.
Yeah. So let the American people, I don't want to say morons because that's insulting my own audience, but we all know we're kind of moronic over here. So how are people going to find it if it isn't immediately listed on my cell phone or anything like that? Where are they going to get it and find it and get the subscription going?
Well, there's two ways. One of which is nearly finished, a work in development, which is to go to Chris's site directly.
Okay.
Which is cyclinglegends.co.uk, Chris.
That's right. Yep.
You can go to our podcast host site, which is awsound.com /cycling-legends-podcast, which is a really long-winded way of doing it. I'll send you. I mean, it's incredible. Just search for Awsound and Cycling Legends, and it'll take you there.
Okay.
But there's a free feed because one of the things we did with my previous venture was we put nearly everything behind a paywall. And that was great, because people found us when we were free, and then to make a living from the thing, we transitioned to being behind a paywall. Starting from scratch, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So there's going to be quite a bit of free content. So just search for Cycling Legends in whatever podcatcher you use. If you go to the site, you'll be able to listen to stuff directly on the site. But Cycling Legends podcast in your podcatcher should just find you the free stuff, and then there'll be a link in the show notes which will take you to the premium subscription.
And I think if you just put it in a search engine as well,
Sure.
John, doesn't it? Comes up with Cycling Legends podcast.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, let's have a little bit of nonsensical fun if you guys are okay with that for a few minutes here. And these are just usually I ask, well, there are a couple random questions now that I think about it, but usually these questions are completely random, but I have some more very cycling specific ones, especially for those of us who don't get to experience European cycling firsthand. So let's do this. First of all, most memorable races you have seen in person. I'm not counting on TV or online. Does anybody have one?
Oh, do you want to go first, Chris, or will I?
Oh dear.
Right, I'll go first to give you some thinking
first.
time.
Yes.
Paris-Roubaix and Carrefour de l'Arbre is just astonishing. The noise, the sweat, the spit, the dust, because when I saw it was dry, it's visceral. I mean, it's a visceral experience. If you go to watch one race, I would say go and watch Paris-Roubaix, because it's both a wonderful expression of modern cycling, but there are real links to the history of the sport. You could feel you're there 100 years ago watching them in the pavé. It's astonishing. And, you can make the trip where you go and see the velodrome the day before, maybe go and see the famous showers with all the winners' names. It's just wonderful. And if you're feeling brave, take your bike and, get your nether regions shattered to bits by riding on the pavé yourself. And the other place would be on the Mur de Huy in Flèche Wallonne. That is just a fishbowl of humanity on that climb. And the great thing about that is you get to see the riders on the climb, 3 times? And you're right beside them, and they are going so slowly compared to when you normally see them. So I'd call it a tie between Mur de Huy and Flèche Wallonne, and actually any of the famous sectors. If you've got to go to the Arenberg, for example, see the monument to Jean Stablinski beside the beer tents at the start of the Arenberg, and then you watch them hit the cobbles at 60 kilometres an hour from a downhill approach, bottles bouncing everywhere. Drunk French people falling over as they watch it. Actually, more drunk Belgians than French people. It's wonderful. So Paris-Roubaix or Flèche Wallonne for me.
There we go. Chris? Yeah.
I'm going for a Tour de France stage standing on a mountain, but particularly Mont Ventoux or Alpe d'Huez. Alpe d'Huez is a natural theatre. I mean, it was an artist, Jean Babragri, I think, who lived in Vaudoisin, who saw the potential of the stage on Alpe d'Huez. And it was him that pestered local businesses, and they got the Tour de France to go there in the 1950s. When the race comes to you, there's all the anticipation, everything, and there's the entertainment of the very Tour de France is just huge, and all the novelties being thrown and stuff like that. But when the race comes, it's like some life form, massive, gigantic life form coming up the mountain to you. You can hear the helicopters coming. You can hear the crowd. You can hear where the race is. And it just gets more and more and more, not violent, but almost, you go to a rock concert, you sat at the front, and when the speakers are going and there's like a shockwave going past you. It's like that. It's just like that. And it can be frightening. Go back to, I was stood on Alpe d'Huez on the stage that was a time trial that Lance Armstrong won. And that was an almost frightening experience because the emotions that were on that mountain, for whatever reason.
Yeah. They were worried about death threats to him, weren't they?
They were. They were worried about death threats. Everything had come to it was like, cycling created it. It was like everything had gone almost too much on that day. So that is just worth experiencing, particularly on those two mountains, because they're so theatrical. The other race I really enjoyed watching was it was terrible because I was wet through all day. Was the World Championships in Harrogate, the men's pro road race in Harrogate, because that was just a complete fist fight. It was just in terrible conditions, and everybody they raced until they reached their limit.
Yeah.
And Adrie van der Poel just completely blew. And they were all racing until their limit. And the big thing that stands out from that is Peter Sagan had made a mistake, and he did try to get across to that front group on the last lap and couldn't. And everybody was in all states of exhaustion. Much left that he put his bike up again, opposite where I was. He put his bike up against the fence, vaulted over it after 260 kilometres in the freezing wet cold, started signing autographs, picked his bike up and then rode off to his hotel. He was not his spec. He looked like he'd been to the shops. It just was an amazing experience, that.
Okay, this is a nonsensical question, and it has to do with cycling, and it's a two-parter. And this one's constantly asked, and I want to get it on record. Could the cyclists of today compete with the cyclists of past generations, and vice versa? Could you imagine a Sean Kelly, a Bernard Hinault competing on today's level, or has the sport completely changed in style, in terms of specialization, in terms of preparation and things like that?
We were actually talking about this in the show we recorded on Friday.
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah. I think they could if they adopted the way that they would like let a team take them over.
Yeah.
If they were prepared. I mean, they tended to be very individual and very driven, but you've got to let all this science take you over and really believe in it. But I think they all would do that, because of many riders I speak to, good riders from the 70s, say, if only we'd known about power to weight.
Yeah.
If we'd only, they say to themselves, I remember riding in the Tour de France and I was 2 kilos below what I normally am, and I went so much better. So there was a and there's always been, they've always been this drive to experiment and push, and marginal gains isn't new. Right from going back from the days of Fausto Coppi walking around the woods on his hunting trips with a weight belt on, with a weight vest, because he thought, well, I may as well have a workout in it. So there's always been that driving force. So I think, vice versa, both ways round. They could. Not everybody. We've just done there's an interview on the website with Rick Van Looy, and Rick Van Looy, I asked about Tom, because he raced with, asked him about Tom Simpson. Was he a good rider? And he was a great champion then, and a great champion. He would be a great champion now. And he says, you can't always say that. Yeah. And I think he was talking then about discipline, about willing to take on science. And some of the riders from years and years ago were just strong. And that's not enough now. You've got to be fast as well. And you've got to be clever, and you've got to be able to keep up with the science and understanding of it. So, I think by and large, they would be able to cope with each other's world.
I've always considered that, because as you say, the technology is so much more. The riders are even more taken care of in today's society. And I don't want to turn into this old man saying, "Oh, we had it harder in our day," but it just seems that there are some riders you see who almost have that old soul perspective, that concept where they could just, if they had a time machine, they'd be fine no matter what generation they landed in.
I think if the radios weren't there, they get criticised about the old pros go, oh, well, they've got somebody shouting at them. They'd be all right without it.
Yeah.
They'd be fine.
Yeah. So if in terms of what races you can't attend, who, in your opinion, is doing it right in terms of race coverage and the ability to actually get a good in-depth perspective? We here in the States are very much stuck with an online format. We are either on the folks over at GCN, or we are scrambling to find some sort of a dark web location where we can watch races. Who does it well over there?
I'm of the opinion that the main thing that's changed is we now get what you would call soup to nuts coverage.
Yeah.
We get that exciting first hour where, you watch the break form and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of race coverage, I think we're still very much locked into the kind of 80s. The camera angles and that kind of thing. There's been small innovations, the onboard cameras from Velo and all that kind of stuff. But it hasn't really changed. And what I find is that my enjoyment of a race is based primarily on who the commentator is. Not that there are bad commentators, they're just different. And like anything else, like podcasts, the one that's to your taste, you will enjoy more. So I tend to jump channels based on who's commentating. But I think there's a lot of innovation that could be done with race coverage. We had, they stopped people using drones to cover a race the other day. I think if you had experienced drone pilots, that would be a fantastic innovation.
That was amazing shot, that footage was. Yeah.
That kind of thing would really make a difference. My personal choice is I watch Eurosport Player because I like... I've used Eurosport since it was a big satellite dish on the roof. Now it all comes in via the tubes and the internet.
Sure.
And I'm just used to the way they cover a race. And I've watched them since back in the days of, before David Harmon, when the commentators were just hugely amusing. And they've got some great comms now. When you listen to people like Dan Lloyd, who's also in GCN, it's really good, because they're relatively recently retired pros, so they've got a real insight into the current scene. I occasionally watch SBS in Australia. They've just bumped Robbie McEwen, actually, which was amazing to me, because he was one of the best analysts and had a great sense of humour, but they've got a good team as well. So I tend to choose according to who the commentator is. And sometimes I'll just watch the raw feed with just the sound and commentate myself in my head. But I think there are real innovations that could be made in coverage. And I also think the soup to nuts thing isn't necessarily great. For some stages, for some races, 20 minutes would be enough.
Yeah.
Because there's only 20 minutes of action in 5 hours of riding. And I find myself, because I have to watch it for a living, sitting there for 4 hours going, well, this is 4 hours of my life I'm never getting back. So I think tailoring the coverage to the stage and, maybe dropping in a highlight if something significant happens in an unexpected bit would be great. But we are spoiled. There's too much cycling to watch now. I'm passionate about the sport. I can't watch everything that's on.
Especially today. I know today I haven't had a chance to even turn on any of the races, and there are, 4 different races going on right now.
You've got Nairo Quintana attacking in one race. You've got Thibaut Pinot away.
Yeah.
What do you watch? It's great.
It is. It's fantastic, especially when we were brought up. And I don't know what it was like in the US there, but Saturday afternoon, there might be 5 minutes of a classic when I was in the 10, 11, 12, 13.
Yeah. Ours over here was all network stuff wedged in between pit crew times in NASCAR, and it was all done to a John Tesh soundtrack with Phil Liggett as a second commentator. That was
it's awesome. I watched when everything was locked down with COVID. Scott and I did vintage races.
Yeah,
for subscribers, where we'd send a link to a YouTube video and say we're going to talk about this as if it's live. And people loved it, but for a lot of the races, all you could get was the American coverage. Yeah. And it was this man in a suit and a tie, sounding like he was advertising Walmart, and then suddenly he'd hand off to Phil Liggett.
Yeah. The rain jackets ones were my favorite, when they had those big, long trench coat jackets on to make it look like they were about to open it up and expose themselves to a gigantic worldwide audience. Check this out! Something like that. Yeah. How about in terms of the interviews? If you guys had to pick the best interview you've ever had the opportunity to conduct.
Well, I've got a relatively limited number of interviews, unlike Chris, who I actually have to have. I've got a horn which I squeak when he name drops on the podcast.
I hit a bell sound effect on mine, yeah.
Just to get him to stop name dropping furiously. We did an interview with Tyler Hamilton, a live interview which we broadcast to subscribers just before the secret race came out. And I've got to say, I really like Tyler. He was a fantastic interviewee. He turned up very smartly dressed with his hair done because he thought it was a video interview and was very disappointed when it was just audio. He was funny. He was engaging. And at the end of it, I turned to Scott and I said, he wants to say something. And there was that sense of a man coming to terms with his legacy, coming to terms with what he'd done to achieve, the great results that he got. And it hammered home to me something that Chris and I have talked about often, is because you make a bad choice, because you make a choice that's driven by the culture of the sport that you're involved in, it doesn't make you a bad person. I really warmed to Tyler, even while I might despise the choices that he made. And it really broadened my appreciation of the effect of performance-enhancing drugs in our sport, because it's too easy to be black and white. It's too easy to go doper's bad, non-doper's good. I came away from that particular interview with a real sense that these are rounded human beings who, like all of us, make bad choices from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, interviews, I've done so many. They do all stand out. They've all been memorable. You've done well when they take you home to meet their wife as well, or show you. Dario Cioni, I spent the day in his vineyards helping him, and Nico Martin, we went to every cafe for a drink that he could find. They've just all been memorable, and you get a lot of true moments as well. But Eddie Merckx does stand out because it was him, and I had a really long period of time with him on a couple of occasions, and he was very revealing. But I found they've all been quite revealing to me, and I've just enjoyed doing them, just going to see where they live and going to their house. Memorable trips. One trip stands out was going to Milan Airport and getting upgraded to a Mini Cooper, a red Mini Cooper car with the flappy paddle gears, and I had to drive into the Alps to see Maurizio Fondriest because he lives really high up in Claes, and he took me to his orchards and took me to see his brother, and then to his bike shop and see his Legnano bike that he won the Worlds on. So that it's like this. They're very good at selling themselves, but they are easy to talk to, cyclists. Apart from this, obviously, the doping changes them and changes the things they have to lie about. But they're quite easy to talk to and enjoy talking and quite captivating. And I've never met an unintelligent pro cyclist.
Mm-hmm. I'm amazed you haven't mentioned Eddie Plankert.
Oh, yeah, crikey, yeah. Eddie Plankert. Well, there has been that many. I mean, Eddie Plankert, this was the time when he lost all his money and was living in a cabin in the Ardennes. And we had a weird idea, me and Albert Bjurick, who's a family friend who had a bar, he's dead now, had a bar in Ghent. And he said, I think I know where he is. So he wasn't on any phones or anything. So we found him, and we found him, went down this track and up a track and round a track, and we found him and his family in this shack. And the two people that I've interviewed, both Belgians, who were great success and lost all their money. I mean, Eddie's made it back now, but by being a television personality. But they both, and Freddie Martins, both said the same thing. Money's not important. Having a family and having a wife and being alive is the important thing, and I've still got that. And that's, they didn't do that with any falseness, and they didn't do that with any thought. Freddie Martin said exactly the same thing. But there's been it's been interesting just going to see these people, and I can't say that any one stands out. They've all been a joy and a privilege to speak to, and I still get that same fascination.
I've had so many moments doing this show that I've been able to speak. I remember 1 2-week time period in particular, and I'm gonna get my name drops in here, where I was able to speak to Stephen Roche, Sean Kelly, and Phil Anderson all within a 2-week time period. And I think I practically, after finishing the last interview, first of all, speaking to my heroes, and I felt like this, you're so cool, man. Can I just remember that? That was cool. And I just felt like like a giddy child the entire time. And I think after I finished the last interview, I was like, that's it. I could just go out and step into traffic now. My everything has been, I've done it. Checked all the boxes in terms of my professional life and spoken to my heroes. And as you say, they were far much more approachable than I had imagined.
Yes.
I'm sitting downstairs with 3 minutes to go before the interviews. I'm swaying back and forth, going, okay, we're going to be fine. You're going to do this. It's okay. And then they're just, hey, yeah, no, hold on just a second. I got to, I'm just fixing myself a sandwich. I got to set it aside or something along those lines. And it's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm exactly the same, yes. And within 5 minutes, within just a few minutes, you're not working on that level, not that fan level to the hero. They just get rid of that straight away.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that cyclists have got, because, again, taking Eddie Merckx aside, they lose more often than they win.
Yeah.
You're out there doing it. You're out there training in the public, and you're out there battling with the same cars we are all battling. So at heart, they're just ordinary people and everybody is passionate about cycling.
Mm-hmm.
Don't become a pro cyclist just because you're good at it. You really have got to have a passion for it.
Well,
because you're going to be a long time on that bike. You're going to have a lot of disappointments.
Remco Evenepoel popped into my head there. So sorry when you were talking about people who are really good about it, and I don't know if he's passionate about it, but I'm that's my bias. Anyway, I'll just keep that to myself, even though I just said it on the podcast and I don't edit. All right, you guys, we'll finish this off with a few quick nonsensical questions, gentlemen. How do you take your coffee?
Black.
Flat white.
Flat. What the hell is flat white?
It's micro bubbles and crap like that. It's
Espresso
a white
for me.
coffee that's a bit frothy.
Okay. I laughed so hard I hit my nose on my microphone. Beverage of choice, if you outside of coffee.
Oh, well, this is my birthday week. I've had quite a few beverages of choice.
That's why I chose this question, John. I've been watching you, and this is actually just a glorified intervention. We want to talk to you about your drinking.
Well, I think the fact that two of my best friends own a wine shop, it's probably an indicator of one of them. I like good wine. My favourite drink this week has been a good old-fashioned. I think it's really hard to beat a good old-fashioned. And I love Belgian beer in all of its shapes and forms. But if I had to drink one thing for the rest of my life, it would be a good old-fashioned.
Okay. With Kentucky bourbon?
Well, the funny thing is, a good strong proof bourbon makes the best kind of old-fashioned. Although we were staying for our anniversary, we were staying in quite a nice hotel this week. And they did an old-fashioned made with Glenmorangie single malt, which it's sacrilege for me, mixing with a malt. But it was absolutely delicious.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Chris, beverage of choice.
I'm a Belgian beer fan.
You are good.
I'm a Belgian beer fan, but if it's got to be one thing, it's a Côte de Rhône. It's sunshine in a glass.
Mm.
And that's the only red wine I drink. It's the only wine I do drink. In preference. I mean, if somebody else is buying, I'll drink anything, but that's what I buy for myself.
Sunshine in a glass. I think somebody needs to put that on a label if it isn't already. Favorite band or musician? I know John his head is going to explode shortly because he has to pick one, but
Jeez. Is this a listen to one thing for the rest of your life thing?
Not necessarily. No, it could be who you are currently into right now. It could be an artist that changed your life. It could be a song that you can't get out of your head, even with a ice pick, anything like that.
Artists who changed my life. A Scottish guitarist called Bert Jansch. If you're familiar with Led Zeppelin, on Zeppelin 1, there's a track on side 2 called Black Mountainside, which is a note-for-note lift of a Jansch arrangement of a traditional English folk tune called Black Waterside. Jimmy Page acoustic playing, hugely influenced by Bert Jansch.
Wow.
And Bert was taught by a good friend of mine, Len Partridge, who was instrumental in the folk revival in the 60s in Scotland. Bert changed my life. I went from strumming and being a kind of nice picker to, well, whatever I am as a guitarist now. Jimmy Page was the first person that made me want to pick up a guitar. Jimi Hendrix, I didn't appreciate him when I was young, because there are so many crap out of tune recordings. But once you get Hendrix, you really get it. But just now, I've got in heavy rotation Queens of the Stone Age.
Oh, wow, nice.
I'm really upset because we've got 3 children. And I was really looking forward to that point where I could go, call that music? That's not even got a tune. Because that's what my mum and dad did to me. Yeah. My kids have introduced me to so much good modern music, but they also surprised me by, our middle boy lives in China, and he just said, Dad, I've been listening to Nick Drake lately. And it's all of that stuff. Yeah. I can't narrow it down, Pat. You know that. That's a vicious question to ask me.
Well, I was wondering if it was going to be some synth pop band or something like that. You're really into Erasure or something like
Kraftwerk
that.
Kraftwerk are awesome. Jimmy Somerville, fantastic singer. Go on YouTube and watch some of his slow versions of Bronski beat tunes and that kind of thing. I mean, talking about synth pop. And Erasure, anything with Vince Clarke's going to be a good tune. Yeah. So I am Catholic with a small c when it comes to music. There's some stuff I don't like, obviously, because I have taste, but there's something in music for everybody. And without music, Frank Zappa got it right. Music is truth. It's as simple as that. There is no better way to tap into the human heart than through music for me. But seriously, that's a whole other podcast, man. I suspect in the thing that you, me, and David are doing, music might be mentioned on the odd occasion.
I'm not completely opposed to that. That's for sure. Chris, do you want to follow John on that topic, or
I don't think I can. I don't think I can. I listen to a lot of music without necessarily knowing what I'm listening to. I'm a big fan on my turbo trainer now of dance music. What is it? Underworld and Slippy. I can have that on a loop. But if there is somebody, I did used to go and I've seen Led Zeppelin and various things when I was a long-haired teenager. But as an older person, and me and my wife used to love this. We've seen Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits in every form that he does, and I just love. I think. I don't know anything about guitar playing, and John will probably say I'm wrong, but I think he's a genius. He's a beautiful guitar player. He seems to be a beautiful person. His folk music, whatever he's doing, I've just enjoyed in every way, shape, or form that he appears. We always used to go and try and see him.
I tell you what, you think I can get geeky about bikes? You should get me started on guitars and guitar players. Mark Knopfler, before he could afford an amplifier, used to make his Strat louder by putting the headstock against the door of his cupboard so that the air inside the cupboard vibrated to amplify the sound of the guitar.
Wow.
I can get. Oh, geez, don't get me started on that.
And
seriously.
I don't mean to pick out one of his most prominent songs, but Sultans of Swing is like a 4-minute guitar solo.
It's genius.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I tell you,
and live. I mean, that is amazing when it's live, and it has a particular resonance with me.
Money for nothing. I think we could forgive him for.
Yeah,
it's all right.
Really?
It's an iconic guitar tone, that corked wah Les Paul sound. I
think he was going for a ZZ Top sound at the time.
Yeah. I tell you who I'm really enjoying just now, actually, is a band called Pendulum. And I've been listening to them, and that's kind of hardcore dance music with a guitar element. Because one of my friends, Peredur ap Gwynedd, Perry, is the guitarist for them. And Perry has possibly the most niche job in cycling that I have ever come across. He's the Tour de France and Classics commentator for Welsh language cycling broadcasting.
Wow.
He commentates the Tour in Welsh.
Wow. what's the view that I'm trying to imagine the viewing audience for that.
Well, C4 in Wales the kind of Welsh channel, the equivalent of BBC Scotland or whatever, has a pretty big viewership.
Yeah, it does.
Really?
Particularly North Wales, there's a lot of Welsh speakers.
Yeah, and they pay him well enough and they pay for him to go to the races and all that kind of stuff. And that's his side gig. His main one is he's your actual proper rock star and session guitarist.
Wow.
Worked with Natalie and Bruglia, loads of people he's worked with.
Wow.
But Pendulum are the band.
Okay. My last question, and I think we've already found it, but hobbies outside of cycling. When you're not talking about it, when you're not participating in, what other things are you passionate about?
Anybody that's followed me on social media will know that I am currently obsessed with collecting wristwatches.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few. I thought I had quite a few in my drawer, but it appears that I'm not. You've probably got one of those drawers you open it where they're all lit up and set individually in nice little slots.
I have a special box.
Yes.
I have a watch box. Yeah. And I tell you,
he's like a Bond villain.
yeah.
I found there's a really big crossover between music, cycling, and mechanical watches. The number of conversations I've had with people who've been subscribers for a long time and that kind of thing about watches, it's been fascinating. And as I say, when I talk to Scott, which I do regularly still, all we talk about is watches. And I think this is going to get a bit heavy. I think it's, as I'm getting older, it's an awareness of time passing. And I've always been into watches, but I think that added to my obsession about kind of technical stuff has really fed into the wristwatch thing. And the good thing is my wife doesn't mind because they're small and easy to store, unlike bicycles.
Oh, shit. I have 17 bikes in the house, so I can't say anything.
I've got 4.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
Yeah, away from cycling, I love to be outside and the outdoors, up hills, walking, or I used to love running. Actually, I know I shouldn't do that from a cyclist. I love walking my dog. You might be able to hear the dog because they're just having a standoff with the cat at the moment.
I heard the cat. Yeah.
There's going to be a fight break out in a minute, so we might have to go.
I'll keep it quick. And Chris, you mentioned events. I do want to touch base on that because events are obviously a large portion of all this, but to couple it in with the media source and things like that, what's the event you guys put together currently?
I'm working. I've got worked on it for the last. Well, this year's going to be the 3rd occasion, and it's a retro ride. They've got a bit of big retro cycling boom in Britain at the moment. Bikes that were old steel bikes, steel enamel, beautiful bikes, and there's quite a few. There are about 5 or 6 retro rides in this country, and I've got the Tom Simpson retro ride, which we've turned into a 2-day cycle festival this year, and we're having professional cyclists from different eras come and do talks and be interviewed. Barry Holman's going to be there, and various other people that we've got to confirm. I also do my own talks. That's how I sell my books, and I've got the first one of those for this new season on Friday night, and we'll be doing live podcasts as well, which all come under events. And I would like to see some evenings. We also do some evenings with 1 or 2 bike racers, which I want to try and develop and bring in, so that people can ask them any questions that they want to ask as well. And I've always found they're quite fascinating and entertaining, and it gets you to meet people face to face who just love bikes. And I'm surprised, actually. I mean, I go to these places. I've done 1 or 2 theatres and it's been full.
Wow.
And I think, what, you've come to see me? I hope you're not going to be disappointed.
12 years I've been making a living podcasting. I've never done a live event. We were going to do our first live event just before lockdown, and I am frankly terrified.
They're brilliant. I love them, but I'm an old show-off, aren't I? So get me a crowd in front of me, and
Well, I'm the same way. I first started out as this entire podcast was created as a promotional tool for my event announcing. I'm a sports event PA announcer, and that's where that all started. And then with this show, I've done some live shows in just pubs where we do an interview and we do trivia night and giveaways and stuff like that, and those are so much fun when you get an audience of people who are engaged and there for that specific reason. Now, there have been some shows where I'm in a pub and there are people who are regularly drinking there, and they turn around and they go, "What is the guy in the back talking about? Shut the fuck up!" And all these guys just yelling at me, because they just want to sit and drink their light beer, and so that's always been a challenge. But that's John, you got to do it, man. It's so much fun.
I used to really enjoy playing live as a musician. It's been a long time. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Well, all right, you guys, I've kept you on the line for a good amount of time. So once again, the Cycling Legends podcast is now an audio-based magazine. It's got all the features. And Chris, you mentioned the retro cycling. That was my first listen into the new format, and I loved that episode, and I loved that conversation. And there's a little something for everything. And as John, as you stated, you don't have to listen to the whole thing. You can pick and choose just as you would articles. They're not full-length hour-and-a-half shows. They're all digestible pieces. Would you be?
Yeah. I mean, Chris is changing my mind a wee bit on that. I mean, I'm firmly of the opinion that 30 minutes is the perfect podcast.
Yeah.
And that comes from doing daily shows for the Tours de France and that kind of thing, where at one point we were up to an hour a show, and that's 21 hours over 3 weeks. Who's got the time to listen to that? Particularly when there's 700 other daily podcasts now from the tour. Yeah. But Chris is more of a long form guy, and he's been pushing my comfort zone a wee bit. So we're out to about 40 minutes now, I think, for history shows. Yeah. But we'll always keep it entertaining.
Yes.
Know what an edit's like. If something's going on too long, just be brutal. Just edit the thing. Yeah. So entertainment is our first priority. The length will come after that, but somewhere between half an hour and 45 minutes is probably going to be the average show.
Yeah. I mean, if we've got an interview, if somebody's really talking and they want to talk and they want to carry on talking, then it's going to be longer. And I listen to interviews like that, and you go back to it as well. And some of the documentary kind of features we're going to do. I've got some quite advanced ones that I want to do. They are going to have to be longer to really do the subject justice.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's so great about the platform. One of the ones
that I'm working on is...
Go ahead, Chris.
So one of the ones I'm working on is, are we at the limits of human endurance? So I've got several scientists and different coaches and that, and that is going to be fascinating, and that will necessarily be reasonably long.
And that's what I love about the platform, is there isn't that restriction. You don't have to fit a very specific time window as you would on a radio or television-based format. Or print.
And, of course, a magazine article, it's got to be... I've got the lead story in a magazine that I'm writing at the moment, but it can only be 3,000 words, and it's called The Science of the Tour of France. Well, you can't get... you're just going to have to go down a few channels.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like the science of spokes in the Tour de France, and it may be 3,000 words.
That might be 3,000 words. Yeah,
round bladed, I should not write that article. So, well, everybody out there listening to this, you know where to find it. Just get online, try some of the free samples to start off with. It's just like a heroin deal. The first one's free, and then the next one you got to pay for. And we go from there. And you guys, and I'm not just saying that because I'm going to be involved in a very small portion of this gigantic operation, but it's well worth a listen, and it's a lot of fun, especially for us true cycling junkies who can't get enough of all the intricate details and things like that along the way. So Chris and John, thank you so much for your time, and good luck on the format. I know it's going to be a great change in the way cycling media is presented.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you.
Yeah.